Hello, I'm Linda Graham, author of Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and Even Disaster. In this series of conversations on resilience, you'll be learning from many experts offering practices that help them recover their own resilience. In this conversation with Natalie Bell, we're learning about centering breath, finding refuge in nature, naming experience with kindness, and cultivating both the safety and comfort we need when things get messy, but also the voice of the inner ally that tells us, I've got the strength and grit to get through this. Welcome to this conversation, exploring resources for recovering resilience. Today I'm speaking with my good friend Natalie Bell. Natalie and I met in the Mindful Self-Compassion teacher training years ago. Natalie teaches mindfulness and self-compassion in the Los Angeles area. Natalie has a wonderful gift of being able to be in a sense of presence and evoke that sense of presence for other people. So we may talk a bit more about that in this conversation. This interview will be relatively brief, about 15 minutes, so I'm going to begin with the first question. If we see resilience as the capacity to face and deal with life's challenges, to be able to cope well and skillfully with ordinary difficulties and even extraordinary disasters. So, Natalie, do you have an example of when you have had to cope with something, or you know someone who has had to cope with something, find your resilience, and what was helpful to you at the time to do that?
Yeah, actually, I have a very recent example. Just last month, I took a very hard fall on my left elbow. And this was right before I was taking a trip for my birthday to Hawaii. And so I was, really excited to do something special for myself and my husband. And the fall was pretty traumatic. I didn't break a bone, but I have and still have a pretty significant bone bruise. And while I used many of my techniques in the first few days, and being in Hawaii really filled with the senses of Hawaii, the sounds and the sights, I did pretty well for the first few days. But on the fourth day, I really struggled, and I was almost in a panic kind of mode because the pain and the swelling and the feeling of pressure and very unusual sensations in my body were so strong. I was sure I had to go to urgent care. And I really had to use everything in my power to try and get a sense of feeling more centered and grounded, and even just capable again of seeing what was happening to me in a more spacious and clear perspective, just so I could think logically and reason things out. So you want me to share just what I was using to help myself?
Yes, and I'd like to know if you have a particular go-to practice that is pretty reliable for you in situations like that.
Absolutely. So one of the first two things I use are naming my experience. So when I notice I'm struggling in any way, even for small issues, I acknowledge in awareness what is happening. I name it. So I might say, for example, in that case, wow, this is really painful, and I'm feeling afraid. I don't know what this is. Maybe there's some injury that I'm unaware of, and I'm scared. And just acknowledging this naming with a sense of having that inner support. So really one of my big practices is to keep cultivating the voice of an inner ally. Mm-hmm. So no matter what's happening, I can keep naming it, and I can keep supporting myself in those moments. But because I didn't know what was going on, and that I started even wondering if I needed surgery right away, I also did something else to help settle my own nervous system, and that was a centering breath technique. So I lay down on the grass, and I spent about 5 minutes really focused on visualizing a centering breath in my body. So connecting me to the core, even getting a sense of feeling rooted and connected to the earth. so I could feel a sense of stability and safety, and that sense that I could feel like I've landed here, and I'm okay in this place of being centered, of this place in the center.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped quite a lot.
So these tools help you as you're actually coping with an emergency, a difficult situation. Are there practices you do to cultivate a sense of strength, of resilience before there's an external stressor, before there's an emergency like this?
Absolutely. So yes, this is called a practice, no doubt, because you must practice. I always like to say when I'm teaching people that, the smarter you are, the more you think that you can just get the concepts of all of these practices. And once you get them, you don't have to practice them. This is not true. I know very well that I do a daily practice, even if it's just a few minutes of centering with my breath, so that I know I can use that tool whenever it's called upon me to use. So I can center myself and feel a sense of rootedness, grounding. And then the naming practice with kindness is so important. Cultivating that sense of not only the soft, caring voice, but also the stronger I'm here voice, that kind of, the yin and yang of self-compassion. Cultivating that sense that I can weather this storm, that I've got enough grit and strength to come through this. And I might do this in simple times, like I'm in traffic, running almost behind for an appointment I've got to get to. And in those moments where it's not life or death, it's not super threatening, I do practice that kind of naming and comforting. As well, I may place a hand on my heart, or even if it's super stressful, I just bring a hand to my face and I'll say something like, I am right here. I'm right here for you. And that immediately calls me to a place of safety, of connection with myself, a sense that that I have enough space and room to be able to handle what's here, even if it's still uncertain or unsteady.
So you can practice ahead of time, and you're using your tools during a moment, many moments of having to cope. Are there tools that you can go to if you ever seem stuck or overwhelmed, and the resilience seems less than what you need in the moment? Where can you go from there?
Yeah. So kind of when things fall apart, I start to fall apart. And certainly that happens with as much practicing as I do. I also have prepared that life shows up like that sometimes, that things will get messy and things will seem out of control, and maybe they are out of control. And that I can still use the technique of naming. I can most importantly remember that I see myself in the larger context of humanity, that this is what happens to all of us, these moments where we're really not certain, where we get injured, we get sick, we have problems in relationships or with work that seem unsolvable at the moment. And that if I'm in the midst of that, I can let myself cry. I can let myself feel the pain in the moment. I can let myself come into contact with the true experience of the moment, which may be, in fact, a difficult emotion that I would otherwise not want to experience. And I even acknowledge that maybe I hate feeling this way. I wish I didn't feel like I'm feeling. I so wish I could feel differently. And I might even feel the striving to go there. Just the want to take off or to go to nature. And I might go to nature too, which is that we need these other external supports also, right? So one of my biggest ones is definitely nature. I feel like I'm held there. And that is also another practice that I cultivate regularly, so that whatever's happening, I can go outside and sit next to a tree. I can look up at the blue sky and feel like I am connected to something much larger.
So you're mentioning nature and other resources that we can use to strengthen our resilience, as well as our own internal practices. Are there things that you've found are important to resilience, but people don't often think of them in connection with resilience, but they would be important to know about?
Well, I think this last question and the prior question really addresses that, which is, so many people who've begun to learn these practices, mindfulness and self-compassion, they think that they've got this great toolkit and that no matter what happens, they should be able to deal with it just by kind of pressing the button of their practice. Like, oh, I can just do this practice and I'll immediately feel better. And one of the things to really understand from the larger picture is that it will look really messy at times, as we just said. That part of resilience is knowing there will be moments when it feels like there is no resilience. And can you identify that? Can you say this is a moment of no resilience? This is a moment of falling apart even, or where I'm so scared. I don't know really what to do. I don't feel strong. I don't feel even supported. And can I keep naming that experience with that sense of that voice that we're cultivating, that voice that calls upon this deep-hearted awareness that we build in these practices of mindfulness and self-compassion? Can we keep naming that experience amidst the marsh, when we're in the clouds of the thunderstorm and we don't know where we're getting to? So can we, that's, I think, a big piece of resilience is that non-resilience moment. Like, I'm lost, I'm confused, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if I can handle this. So can we hold those moments in awareness with a sense of spaciousness, a sense of that, again, that voice that we keep cultivating, that is what I call this deep-hearted awareness that lives within all of us.
So in the last minute of this conversation, is there any additional wisdom or core nugget of insight that you would offer about resilience?
Yes, I think sometimes resilience can seem like a tall mountain to climb, like, oh my God, how am I ever going to get all of these things I need to deal with what's happening in my life right now? And I would say, just start small. Start where you are. If it's a practice that you do 1 minute a day, great. Seize the practice and start. Because even 1 minute of real mindfulness and compassionate awareness begins to cause ripples. And so start small and keep building, but start where you are. Don't get, dissuaded by the tall mountain that seems to be in front of you.
Thank you, Natalie, so much for offering your teachings today. This interview and all the interviews in this series will be archived on my website, lindagraham-mft.net. May they be useful to you and yours.